Hey, I'm Louis Falco, and welcome to Essentials. This is a new series I'm starting on this channel to sort of pique my interest again. I know I've been away for a little while, and I do apologize for that, but I have a feeling that the Essentials series will bring me back. So in this series, I'm going to review truly classic and groundbreaking albums. These are albums that helped to define a genre, a sound, or even an era sometimes. And above all, they're just great albums. Now, I'm not going to give these records a score because you can expect them to all be 10s or 9s at least, and I don't want to flood this channel up with 9s and 10s when you already know that these albums are great. So to start off, I've got In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. Now, this is the debut studio album by a band that never quite stayed the same. The only consistent member throughout their entire discography has been guitarist Robert Fripp. And I think that's because Robert Fripp has always wanted a band that was going to change with the times, that was going to evolve to the new sounds that Fripp was interested in. And really, by the 80s, they were a totally different band. The one thing that remains consistent is Fripp's guitar noodling, which never quite goes away on any of their records. He's a very distinct guitarist. You hear his playing and you pretty much know it's him. He is a musician who lives in atonality. His most definitive solos are completely atonal. They're just these wild, noodly, crazy, it's Fripp. I don't know how to describe it, it's Fripp. But definitely their most famous record is In the Court of the Crimson King. And that's because it may be the earliest definitive progressive rock album. Of course, there were some albums that could be considered prog rock before this one, but I don't think anyone defined the beginning of the genre as much as King Crimson did on this album. I mean, the record is really lightning in a bottle, because all 5 of these tracks are just brilliant. The opening track, 21st Century Schizoid Man, is basically proto-metal. It is incredibly heavy for its time. And the grainy effect on Greg Lake's vocals here is just so badass. But really what carries this track and what makes it so definitive, I think, is the incredibly anthemic and memorable riff. That combined with a horn section that just screams along with the guitar. And the drumming on this song is truly orgasmic. I mean, these drum fills are insanely good. It's like all of these musicians knew exactly what to play at exactly the right time. And the middle section of this track, which feels very improvisational but simultaneously rather mathematical, is incredibly captivating. Time signatures are constantly changing, but it's not distracting. You know, I think a problem with a lot of, especially modern prog rock, is they get so wrapped up in having to do weird time signatures, having to change time signatures, that they forget about the music at the core of it. And I think what King Crimson really showed on this album is that there is, and there can be, a musicality attached with musical complexity. It doesn't just have to be bullshit. And the guitar solo on this track is very hard to make out upon first few listens. You won't even really recognize it as a guitar solo because it's totally atonal and all over the place. Fripp is just going nuts on the guitar during this section, and it's really, really awesome if you can pay attention to it. And my god, by the time the riff comes back in after this section, it is so fucking amazing. I mean, really every second of this track is a great musical moment, all the way up to the ending of the track where it just builds into this mesh of noise and before finally just ending abruptly. And that transitions us into I Talk to the Wind, which is a flute ballad. It's so wildly different than the last track that it is amazing how well it flows. I think one thing about prog rock albums that really separates it from a lot of other genres in rock music is that it's very similar to jazz in the way it handles albums. At least with albums like this. You've got 5 tracks that all come together into what is basically a cohesive suite. Sure, it's not technically a suite, but it might as well be. I think a lot of early prog rock artists didn't look at their albums as collections of tracks. They really looked at them as albums. And of course that's not unique to the genre or anything, but it's something to note, I think, about early prog rock. But anyway, I Talk to the Wind is truly a beautiful song. The flute playing on this thing is incredible. And the lyrics on this track are particularly captivating. It conveys this sense of loneliness that is really quite sad, and matched with the flute and the simple drum patterns on this song, it comes together into a track that is very emotional. But really that doesn't even come close to the emotional intensity of the next track, Epitaph. Now this song is an absolutely powerful ballad. It uses the acoustic guitar in a way that not a lot of bands really were at this time. And those loud, reverbed strums of the acoustic guitar that transition us from piece to piece is just epic. And you know, normally I wouldn't use that word, but I do think it describes an album like Court of the Crimson King and tracks like Epitaph. Greg Lake's vocals on this song are so dramatic. It reminds me of something you might see in a musical about, I don't know, medieval castles or some shit. I mean, he really just belts out this chorus, and I fear tomorrow I'll be crying, as the drums and the instrumentation picks up after it kind of cuts out for the beginning of the hook. It's just incredible. The dynamic range of this track is all over the place, and it really comes together into just a song that you need to hear. And that takes us out of side 1 and on to side 2, which begins with a 12-minute Moonchild. Now the actual song here is really only 3 or so minutes long, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's this very subdued mellotron ballad coupled with this amazing ride cymbal pattern that's very inventive and creative for its time. It's really the record's most tender moment, because while I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph display a lot of emotion, Moonchild is very subtle, but captivating nonetheless. And after the actual ballad ends, it transitions into this 9 or so minute improvisational piece. The beginning of this piece is absolutely gorgeous. All of the instruments are coming together into this sound that almost feels like wind. But as this section fades out and goes into the much more spacey instrumental that most of this track is, and every single musician here is just at the top of their improvisational game. If you really pay attention to what they're doing here, it's actually quite brilliant and beautiful. Each instrument plays off of each other, and none of them are trying to take the center stage. They're working to create a beautiful and ambient piece of music. They're not looking to show off their instrumental skill or something. And then there are moments where this track gets very tense and nervous. Like about halfway through this improvisational piece, it becomes very dissonant and atonal and strange. But by the time the track is over, it begins to feel like a lullaby towards the end. You've got these wind chimes that accompany the beautiful guitar, and the drums very quietly play in the background. But really what I think this instrumental serves as is a transitional piece. And it may seem strange to hear me say that because, you know, it's 9 minutes long. And you'd think, well, why would you sit through 9 minutes of transition? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the Court of the Crimson King, the final track here, without Moonchild, this track would not hit nearly as hard as it does. But after the spacey and ambient improvisation at the end of Moonchild, one incredible drum fill leads you into what I think is the best track on the album. This song is a powerhouse, and it is absolutely gorgeous. The Court of the Crimson King is a very fantastical piece, especially in the lyrics, which sounds like a fairy tale. And the incredible mellotron chords that hit during the choruses in this song is, I mean, just absolutely mind-blowing. It has to be heard to be believed. The chorus on this song feels massive. It's really unlike anything else I've heard from the 60s. And the track becomes pretty unpredictable because when you think it's over, it comes back into this slight little flute section before hitting into that chorus again. And by this point, everything's built up, so that mellotron chord is also powered out by keyboards and just a little slightly more instrumentation. It's not too noticeable, but it does make a big difference. I mean, just what a way to end an album with this track. It is beyond words. And I think that's really the way to describe this record, because it's an album unlike a lot of what was coming out around the time. And I do think that without In the Court of the Crimson King, prog rock would not be what it is today. It really demonstrates the artfulness that this genre can have when the time is put in. And I think it is an absolute essential that is definitely worth owning and listening to. So thank you guys for watching. And if you want to find out exactly what I would score these albums, you can go to my Rate Your Music page, which I'll link in the description. It's also linked on my channel. So if you'd like to see me review any classics that you love, I'll definitely consider it if you let me know in the comments section. Bye, guys.